So I was trying to decide how to tackle the subject, because a capital campaign, if you've already done one or you're considering doing one, you know that it's going to be a laborious process that can run years. From soup to nuts, from the moment that you say, okay, I think we're going to do this thing, to celebrating with ribbon cutting ceremony and moving in, it could be 2-3 years. It could even be longer. So the idea of saying, where do we start and what's the best way to approach it? I decided that what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the cliff notes, right? The capital campaign for dummies. However, it's kind of, because I've had the unique opportunity to work with a lot of schools. Half of our clients are Jewish education, and we've done a number of capital campaigns. I'll try to give it a little bit more of the spin on what the pieces that might be most relevant to you, and some kind of common pitfalls or challenges to avoid. And the first two things I want to talk about are a couple mindset things, because we tend to get people come to us at various stages of the game. They might come to us and say, okay, I've got a balloon payment in 2 months. And I'm like, now you come to us, all right? And then people who are like, okay, we're thinking a letter of intent for a property, right? That I much more prefer. Please come at that stage and not when you're already, in the 11th hour. But we have worked with many, many schools and shuls as well who have done capital projects, whether they are from the ground up, they're moving locations, whether they are renovating their existing location, they're adding, expanding their campuses, campaigns that run from $5 million to 25, 30 million, some haven't even figured out where the ceiling is yet. But in the end of the day, we're talking about serious projects that have a commonality regardless of the size, the scope, the religious affiliation. There is a model. There is an approach, a mahalach, on how you can properly do a capital campaign soup to nuts. So the first two things are really important mindset piece, because usually when you are doing a capital campaign, there's a tremendous number of things that you're taking into account from the beginning. Construction, zoning, relocating. You can't have the students where they are right now. There's a 1,001 logistics that you're involved in, even before you put a shovel in the ground, before you're doing anything. And the person who is playing that role as executive director or director of development, it's very easy to be focused on the minutia. When a donor would come to you and say, what's going on, right? Okay, well, we're at this stage of the planning process, and this is what we're doing, right? You're immediately going into the granular aspects of your campaign, because it's what takes up so much of your time. And what's really important, and I don't want to sound a little too kumbaya, but what is really important is to remember what it is that you're ultimately doing. You are building the future of your school. It's never about the brick and mortar institution. It's never about the sheetrock and the fluorescent lighting. It's always about what this building is going to represent for the next 25, 30, 50 years, whatever that case may be. That is your project. Now, everything that you have to do within the scope of that rolls up to that mission. So if your vernacular and the way you talk about the work that you're doing is focused on saying, this is going to, yes, we need to relocate the students over here in order that they don't have to hear this in the classroom, and it's all about positioning what is in the best interest of the students in the here and now, into the future. It has to always roll up to the mission and with the work that you're doing, right? Don't get caught up in the details. Yes, they exist, but when you're talking to parents and to grandparents and to alumni and to the community leaders, it's always about the mission of what you're doing. Everything else is the details. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm being glib or oversimplifying, but all those details are all serving that bigger purpose. So your narrative, that needs to come first. And I've seen it many, many times when they come to us and say, okay, we want to raise a $30 million campaign, and I ask them why. Right? They'll immediately go into all the litany of things that they have to do. I'm like, no. What does $30 million mean to your school? Or what is your school going to look like? What does the full dream look like? And work towards that goal. So it's just a very important paradigm, maybe a shift for some people, but when you're talking about what you're doing, don't get stuck in the details. All right, one second, let's get something here. All right, number 2 is this concept of people support what they help to create. Now, to tell you a quick story, I was approached by a school in Muncie maybe 6-7 years ago, and the executive director or the head of school, the menahel, said to me, I've never, as a badge of pride, I've never had to solicit my parents for the operating budget. Like, they've never had to give a dime, right? And this is the first time I'm giving them an opportunity, and it's gonna be the capital campaign, and they're gonna be like, wow, like, look at what they've done with, without having to go into my pocket. This is the first time they're going, I'm gonna go to these family members. And I said, I know you're saying this as a positive thing, and I appreciate what you're trying to say, is saying that, you're not making these families stretched thin when they're already stretched thin. I understand where you're coming from, and you mean well. But if you never give anybody an opportunity to participate along the way, they're not vested, right? They're not active. And that means both their time, involving them with their time, which is often even more valuable than their money, and their money. Even if you might say, oh, do I really need them to give? The answer is yes, you absolutely need them to give. Because even if it's not a matter of saying we can't make payroll without our parents, but the moment you are developing a healthy, what we'd call an annual campaign, supporting unrestricted activities at the school, those are now stakeholders. Like, congratulations, you're building yourself a small army of people so that when it comes down time for a capital campaign, you're leveraging those relationships. And then, once you have those relationships, the process of a capital campaign also needs to be involving leadership and lay leadership. And we're going to walk through this process of what that looks like, because if you do it alone, okay, what's the benefit? The benefit is no one has to tell you what to do. That sounds nice, that sounds great, but it's also on your back alone. So you might say, okay, I'll go hire people as I need different functions and projects. Okay, well, the question is that a good use of your time and money? But more importantly, if this is going to be something that supports the community, then it would be advantageous to have the community's buy-in on a very visceral and a basic level. If they have skin in the game, you ask them to roll their sleeves and play a role, and there's a lot of manufactured opportunities that you can build into your campaign that will allow your lay leaders, the people who are in your community, to play an active role. That is a must. If you try to go it alone, I could tell you that you might raise a few $1,000,000 because you might be a great fundraiser, and your annual campaign, you could say, hey, I do $500,000 every year. I could probably raise the capital money myself. The answer is you could raise some of the capital money, but imagine the social proof when you have lay leadership involved. They say, oh, they're involved and they're involved. Yes, there you have that. You also have the fact that they have access to people that you may not have access to. Right? So expanding your network, going 1 degree of separation, you'll have that as well. You also have the aspect that they come with expertise. They could be a knowledge center when it comes to sales or marketing or finance, and all these things are really important in the process you're doing. They become valuable assets in the project that you're doing. And it's not manipulation. You're saying, I could do this myself, and we can maybe hobble along, or you could be involved and you can elevate this whole project. And also, when you're talking to get people involved, that's the angle. The angle is, I need you to play a role, but I'm not looking for a feather in the cap type of lay leader. I need somebody who will roll up their sleeves, because especially projects like capital campaigns, they could be definitely a vanity project for a lot of people to be involved in such a magnificent project. If you're Mesivta of Long Beach and you're going to move to Muncie and you could be involved in a project like that, oh wow, I could be the next era of the yeshiva. I could be on the committee and be involved. But we don't want just someone like a feather in the cap, like just a badge of pride. We want someone who can roll up their sleeves and play an active involvement, have active involvement. And it's our avoda, it's our job to be able to say, this is where your job begins, this is where your job ends, and this is how you're going to be a vital piece of this process. And that is very often met with appreciation, especially when you just avoid. You don't want to say, I want to get you involved. That amorphous language doesn't help anybody. But when you give someone a very specific job with roles and responsibilities, it becomes much more effective. So what I want to talk about now is something that, when I've pitched this concept, and it's not my concept, in the secular fundraising world, the terminology is called a feasibility study. I happen not to love the language of feasibility study because it sounds academic. So it sounds like, oh gosh, a pretty report you're going to give me, spiraled, sit on my shelf, and that's what it is. And also, feasibility sends the message like, is your campaign feasible? And I also don't like that, because the idea is that's not going to stop anyone from putting a shovel in the ground. Of course it's feasible. The question is, what scope? Right? We're busting at the seams. We have kids in trailers. We have kids upon kids upon kids. Of course you need new infrastructure. It's not about, is it feasible? The question is, what is the scope of this project? What can our community support? Is there an appetite for a project of this size? And if I can do some legwork before I put a shovel in the ground or before I start raising money, then I might be able to make the best possible ask, instead of doing fire ready aim and then find out that I left money on the table, or I solicited somebody who shouldn't have been solicited today, should be someone I should have worked on for 6 months, and then solicit them. There's a lot of variables that will go into the idea of saying, well, hold on, before we start doing a capital campaign, let's understand what our existing community thinks about such a project. And this feasibility study is usually about a 4-month process. Ideally, anywhere between 3 and 4 months, but I'll get to why it usually kind of drags on a little bit longer than typical. But a feasibility study, or what we call a pre-campaign experience, which I think is more accurate to say that you're giving your donors an experience before the campaign launches, is ultimately a process that looks like this. You develop a small steering committee. Steering committee, by definition, is someone who has a committee that's not going to go for the next 8 years, right? It's something that has a start, a finish, and you disband the committee. So that's the definition of a steering committee. So a steering committee of maybe 6 or 8 key lay leaders who are your inner circle. You already know who those people are. They're usually mostly people who are already active on your board. They're your confidants, the people that you lean on, and also the people who have a wonderful reputation in the community, as these are your go-to people from your school. That steering committee of 6 to 8 people have 2 jobs. Job number 1 is to oversee the creation of a document that we call a case statement. Case statement is in its finished form, which is anywhere between 15 pages, 16 pages, something along those lines, says this is who we are as a school, this is where we're going, and this is how you can help us get from point A to point B. Okay? That's very important. This is who we are today, this is where we're headed, and this is what, this is how much we need to raise, these are the dedication opportunities, and this is how you can help us achieve that goal. That document, you might say, okay, well, I'll go hire a graphic designer, I'll hire a good copywriter, and we'll write all the wonderful stuff about our school. Before you do that, you want to hire someone who knows how to do a case writing, where they'll interview your key constituents. So, for example, usually the executive director, maybe the board, the president, treasurer, some of your key leadership, they're going to know more about the project, the technicals of the project, so they need to be interviewed. But then you want to interview maybe someone who is a grandparent who went to the school, and their kids went to the school, and their kids went to the school. You might want to interview a teacher who's been teaching in the school for 25 years. You want to try to get a 360-degree view of what your school is, because that's the difference between reading a document that feels like a propaganda piece, like it's this navel-gazing, like we have academic excellence, blah, 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 all the other buzzwords, and this is who we are, versus something that gives you goosebumps, that goes, oh, like they captured the spirit of our school. And the only way you can capture the spirit of your school is if you're interviewing people who are looking at your school from different perspectives. The way you, as the executive director or the Menahel, talk about the school is not how a parent talks about the school, and is not how a teacher talks about the school. They're going to look at it through their own lens. You're all going to have wonderful things to say about the school, but you're approaching it from a completely different lens. The way you speak about it is going to be different than the way your colleagues speaks about it, which means having a case statement that reflects those interviews is really, really important. So it's almost like more like a journalistic, like a human interest piece, as opposed to something that's just cold hard facts. It like tells a story. It might say, we have a special resource program, and this is a success, and here's a story of a boy who was successful. So stories are powerful tools, but ultimately this document needs to give people go, yeah, like this is my school, and I'm proud of my school. And now that you're painting a picture of what we're going to look like, I'm salivating over that. I'm excited about what this can ultimately be for me and my family. So you're going to have equal parts of Hakar Satov and excitement about where you're going, but that document needs to reflect those conversations. So the steering committee's first job, is to oversee the creation of that document, right? When they get it to the point where they're happy with a draft of that document, where you say, this looks good, like the messaging is good, before we go to design, before we make it, special die cut opens up inside the whole fancy, piece, before you get to that stage, formatted nicely in a document that says, this is the language that we're most likely going to go with. You take that document, and then with the steering committee's help, their second job that they have to do is first the executive director is going to help identify who those people are, but your top 25 VIP prospects for the campaign. If you have been doing fundraising for any period of time, you'll know that the 80-20 principle, maybe 90-10 principle, the majority of money comes from a handful of people. So you should be able to come up with a list of your VIP prospects, the ones who could carry your whole campaign about 75% of the way there. Now, of course, you might say, oh, I don't know if I have 25 people, or I don't know if it'll get me 75% of the way there. I understand. But it's also that exercise of going through and saying, do we have the people who can carry this campaign in a significant way? It'll be the people who are either the ones who are the money people, who can give you financially. Sometimes it might be a very influential person that their buy-in to the project is very important. It might be a local federation exec, head of the foundation, if it's a community foundation, and you're going to be looking at donor-advised funds, so playing a very active role. Whatever the case may be, you're going to be looking at the people, maybe it's a particular synagogue rabbi in the area that you think that getting their investment and buy into the project will translate into a wider community support. But looking at this prospect list and saying, these are the people. If they're not bought in, then we have got nothing doing, right? So you're going to develop that list of 25 prospects, and your steering committee's job is to help make an introduction with that person to say, we have a third party, usually it's a third party consultant, and I'll explain why in a moment. A third party consultant, and you don't have, whether it's me or our firm or anybody else, but the premise of having a third party consultant is to conduct confidential interviews with those top 25 people, all right? Not a solicitation. Right? We're not asking them to do anything. We're saying, we're asking the person on the steering committee is going to them and saying, we are about to embark on a very substantial project that will change the face of our school and the community in very substantial ways. And before we come out the door, it's really important for us to have conversations with our partners and test the messaging, test the resonance of the messaging, test the appetite for a project like this. Would you accept an interview? We like to say, 45 minutes, even to an hour, but we always get pushback from the client saying, hey, try to get 20 minutes, and if it goes beyond that, it'll go beyond that. But ultimately, we want to be able to have an opportunity to sit down with each of those 25 people and say, in advance, here's a draft of that case statement. We're going to have a meeting in a week from now, and I want to ask you about what your thoughts are on this project. And that once we get the secured yes, that they're willing to be interviewed from the steering committee, then we, as the third party, will have those interviews with them. I mentioned it's confidential. Confidentiality has a very good purpose in that if you, as the executive director or Manahal or Rosh Yeshiva, are going to go sit down in front of your own donors and talk about this project, you're going to get answers that look a certain way, right? It's going to be highly spackled. It's going to be massaged. It's going to be exactly what they think you want to hear because you are the one who is the one that's most invested, involved in the project. When we do it, we're not looking for problems. We're not there to kind of say, oh, what do you really think of the Hanhala? What do you really think? Like, that's not our angle. But what we're doing is we're asking them about their pre-existing relationship with the school. For some people, it might be 2 years, 3 years. Some people might be 25 years. We're asking about their relationship with the school and having a series of questions about that. Then we're moving on to, we sent you a draft of the case statement a week ago. Hopefully, did you have a chance to read it? And then talk about that. Some people will talk big picture. They'll say, oh, you have this theme in the case statement that says this. I'm not sure I understand that. What do you mean by that? So you're having a conversation big picture. Some of them might go like, okay, so you have a typo on page 8, line 3, right? That exists too. And that's also valuable, right? We don't want typos going out the door either. And sometimes someone catches something or doesn't understand something, or they say, what's this program that the school does? Like, I've been involved in the school for 15 years. I don't know what that program is. That's helpful. If you have a major donor or donor prospect who doesn't even know that you have a special resource room program or something like that, and you're featuring in there because to you as the organization, you think this is important and they don't know what it is, it's helpful to know what they know and what they don't know. So and then the last stage after we ask them about the case statement is about if they're testing their appetite. Is this something that you'd be willing to support? So we'll say to them, this is not a solicitation, right? I'm not here to ask you for money or your time. But based on what you're reading in this case statement, is this a project that you are excited about? And if they say yes, we then have like this like a choose your own adventure. If they say this, turn to page 106, like that kind of dynamic where if they say that they're excited about it, we'll say, because we're interviewing people who can really support this campaign in significant ways, most of the people we're interviewing are prospects that we're looking to solicit 7-figure gifts and 6-figure gifts. Do you see yourself giving at a 7-figure gift level? And then they will either say, I have to talk to my wife, or they might say, absolutely not, or they might say yes. And if they say yes, we say, would you be comfortable sharing a range, like where you're thinking right now? And if they say no, do you see yourself giving at a 6-figure gift level? If they say yes, you say, would you be comfortable sharing a range? And if they say yes, we ask them, the range. And if they say no, then we report back. About 50% of the people we interview give us an actual range, 5-0, which is wonderful. right? Imagine going to a capital campaign and you already have a sense of where they are today. And you didn't blow the solicitation yet. Like, you haven't done the solicitation yet. So you know before going in the room where their head is at. It doesn't mean you're going to solicit them at that price point, but you know before going in what they're thinking about it. And you might say, you know what? That's not really where I want to be with this guy. And based on the feedback I got from the consulting firm that says, this is what they're passionate about, this is what might be their frustrations, or all that kind of stuff, will inform your strategy to say, okay, before I go in guns blazing and asking for a gift, I'm going to have some cultivation steps between now and then to make sure that I'm leaning into the things that they love and I'm addressing the concerns that they may have. And if they have concerns, sometimes the concern is something you can fix. Oh, we screwed something up. They weren't treated properly as a donor. We didn't get the correct thank you. So it might be something like that. Or sometimes they're upset about something that you can't help them with. It's a position of the school, right? If they expect something and it's not the hashkafa of the school, then you have to go in prepared to say, I know this is something that is a pain point for you. I know you care about this thing. Let me explain to you why we take the position that we do. You educate them and you hope that they'll respect your decisions, but you're in charge of the narrative. You're able to get ahead of it. Instead of getting surprised in a solicitation and them going, well, I'll tell you what's really bothering me. And now the whole conversation's this, right? You were talking about the big exciting project where you're going, and now you're trying to do, and now you can't ask for the gift right now because it's like, okay, well, that meeting didn't go as well as I thought it was going to go. So now I have to deal with this issue and then come back to them maybe in 2 or 3 months if I didn't blow it and try to rectify it. This gives you the opportunity to get that all done in advance. So this is, as you can hear, very, very valuable to make the best possible ask. And I'll give you an example that just literally happened. So I won't use obviously the donor names, but I'll give you a sense into what happened. This happened literally like a month, maybe 6 weeks ago. We have a client in Chicago, and the client said to us, okay, like there is a kollel that is like they're not connected to our yeshiva, but they're the same building space. We're in the same area, and one of the major funders of that kollel is someone we want to solicit. They're not one of our donors, right? It's one of their donors, but they're kind of like guilty by association. Like they're friends with our hanhala, we're in the same space, but we want to go to this major donor and ask for a gift. And we're thinking right now, based on our projections, probably $100,000 would be the appropriate number. So I go and I have this conversation with him. I do all the things I said, what's your previous relationship? And it was parv. It was like, yeah, well, I'm really close with the founders of the school, and I see the hanhala and that, but it's not, he then qualified. It's not my school because I'm involved in something else, and we went through that whole conversation. And then I get to the end and I say, we're looking for people who can really help carry the campaign. Do you see yourself giving it a 7-figure gift level? He said, yes. We were going to solicit him for $100,000. And had we done that, everyone would have been like cheering, like, hooray, we got the $100,000. And we'd been none the wiser that we left it was $1 million gift, $900,000 on the table by not asking that simple question of, do you see yourself giving out a 7-figure gift? Like, if that doesn't tell you that this exercise is worthwhile, then I have no other stories to share that could do it. But we have many wonderful stories. I did work with, I'll give you this very specific example. I was doing a pre-capital campaign experience for Telz Cleveland, and one of their donors was someone who's based in Muncie. I get to the door, Hasidish Levush, like didn't look like a Telzer. Now I know the brand of Telz, like when someone passes away, they'll be on their matzeva say they were a Telzer. Like there's a real pride and an identity attached to it. And I saw him in Muncie. I went to visit him. And one of the early questions I ask, obviously, are variations of, what is your relationship with the school? So obviously I knew this was going to be an interesting one, but I was even more pointed. I said, this is my question, but I really want to know because you kind of don't look like the typical Telzer. And he laughed. And we went into a conversation where he got emotional. And he said he wasn't succeeding in the system that he was in when he was a boy. He came to Telz. He started to thrive. The Rosh Yeshiva said, do not change who you are. This is your family. This is who you are. You should be proud of what you are. We're going to, your learning will obviously be heavily influenced by who we are and what we do. But you are whatever flavor Chasidi was. But that was ultimately something, and it made a huge roshem on him. It was, and by asking him this question about his previous experience, he was all channeling it back. It was like as if he was back again, and I'm like sitting there and I'm getting emotional and he's getting emotional. And those are the best conversations because you're able to ask them, recreate what it is about your connection to the school. Sometimes when you get into a solicitation, we immediately go do all the talking. So let me tell you about the scope of the project, and this was an opportunity for them saying like, what's your connection to TELS? Why am I sitting here right now? And ultimately, it gives an opportunity for that person to reignite their appreciation and say, and he was saying, my kids and my community and all this is because of TELS, right? Like that's remarkable. And that makes a huge impression. So ultimately, those conversations will allow us to come back to the client and we will give them an aggregate report. So we ask similar questions to everybody. So there's like a matrix of like when we ask this question, 8 people responded in this way, and here's like an anonymous pull-out quote that kind of underscores that message. And we asked this question about how they were treated as a donor, and 11 people said this, right? So we're really capturing on the big picture, which can influence how you talk about the campaign, what the messaging is, and how you launch it, et cetera. And then we give a person-by-person recommendation about the donor to the organization. And we usually leave it with the executive director, even though it's a steering committee. It's sensitive information a lot of times. So we'll say, this is for you, and you can decide if you want to give it in whole to your leadership, your steering committee, or if you just want to cherry pick and say, look, we're going to go to this donor. Let me tell you some of the information I have on them. This is what they care about. This is what they have issues with, and things along those lines. We are very careful, even in that setting, not to give up information. If someone says something that's kind of, very indicting of a particular board member or is not so flattering, we do find a way to give the information that the organization needs to be able to make the best possible solicitation while protecting the anonymity that sometimes is required. So there is that kind of sensitivity that we have to balance. So that process ultimately ends with you saying, okay, we can now go take our case statement, finish it up. You'll make some tweaks, and I got some interesting stories about how it really re-engineered some of the focus on some capital campaign case statements and what it looked like in the final product. So you're able to finish that and make it look beautiful. All your top 25 people know what's coming, right? They've had the conversation. They know that they're going to be solicited by it. And then when you, the Menahel or Rosh Yeshiva, executive director, president, whoever's involved, comes into the room with a beautiful case statement that they've seen the early version and now they see the finished version, and you're having a conversation. The conversation is starting here, and you're able to make that best possible ask. So it really primes you to move into the next stage, which is this was that story, right? It's going to the quiet phase, which is the top 25 donors, where you're going to be soliciting them for that campaign goal. And this is a very important exercise. Once you've done that and you're soliciting your donors, now it's just a matter of balancing who gets solicited, in what order. Do you need to play off particular donors off of another one? Right? One of the important things to take away is that when you're going to your lead gifts, so the language that we use in the business is there's lead and major gifts. Lead gifts are the 7-figure, because they're the ones that are leading the way, and the major gifts, which are 6 figures and down to a certain point. And when you're talking about lead gifts, especially when you're going to your first few people, it's really, especially if there's an optics piece to it. There's obviously certain askanim in certain communities where that's the guy, right? This is the guy, or these are the guys who really carry the school in a very substantial way. The conversation with them, it needs to be very pointed to say, you are going to be the ceiling. So if you come in at $1 million, there will be no gifts higher than $1 million. If you give $2 or $3 million, we might be able to get other $1 million gifts. But because you're perceived as the pinnacle of the giving, there's a responsibility that you have to stretch as much as you can, because all the other gifts are going to follow suit underneath you. So they're going to lead by example, which is why after you do your lead gifts, you're going to your leadership, the board, the steering committee, all of them, even if they're not necessarily the biggest gifts, you want them to lead by example and say, our leadership team is involved, they're giving to capacity, and we're ready to go to the rest of the community. Especially because when you start doing the solicitations, it's not necessarily going to be just the Rosh Yeshiva or executive director. You're going to want to bring certain people along with you on a solicitation, because that's going to make it a better solicitation. Bringing a colleague or bringing another steering committee, one of the steering committee members, who obviously was the one who helped make the introduction to one of the people you interviewed, bringing them along with you is invaluable. I'm a big fan of making sure there's 2 people in the solicitation, not 3. It's too much. It's not a basin. We don't need to do that. But we do want to have it where you have 2 people there, where one person's talking, right? It gives you the opportunity to think or to take it in and see how the person you're talking to is responding. Also, and I know I said this in the Date Your Donors talk earlier, or you heard this message ad nauseum, is it's really important to do the active listening. right? I know you're going in, it was tough to get the meeting, and you're, okay, we do this, and you kind of vomit it all out, and now you're asking for the gift. But it's really important to say to them, you were involved in this process. You saw the scope of the project. What do you think? Is this something you're excited about? What are the things you're most excited about? They'll probably pepper you with questions because they're already more informed than the typical donor. They saw a little bit under the hood about what's going on. Those conversations are going to be great, but it requires you to not just be the one talking, try to catch yourself. And if you have someone with you, it'll be a good interplay in order to make sure that you are actually landing the solicitation. Okay, so this is another really wonderful story about the quiet phase of a capital campaign. It's something that I think isn't just a one-time example. It's something that you can really do on numerous occasions. Sometimes, as I mentioned with the other story, you're going into a solicitation and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to ask for $100,000. And in the case of the story that I'm going to share now is somebody who was a young nursing home owner in Chicago, kind of like the next generation. And the school that one of our clients in Chicago, a different one, not the same one from before, another school in Chicago, they were going to go solicit this guy for $100,000. And the message was like, all your chaverim, all your friends are giving at that level. I'm going to come to this person at that level too. $100,000, young nursing home owner, thought it would be an appropriate gift. And I was speaking to this executive director before he was doing the solicitation. We were just hashing out the details. And I said to him, what is his thing? Like, what does he love? He goes, he was a very big sports guy. I know he does give to other NCSY sports and other types of sport, team sports. He's a big sports guy. So I said, well, do we have nothing that might appeal to him in that level? And he said, no, the only thing that we have for sports is the outdoor, basketball courts and a fitness area in the school, but it's a $250,000 price tag. And that's way more than what we're going to go to this guy for, what we were planning on going to this guy for. So I said, how about this? Go to him and say, your buddies, your friends are giving you the 100K range. That was what I was thinking, to come in and say, that would be a gift that I would want to know if you would consider giving. However, we have this thing that I think you really might like, right? But it would require you to stretch. So instead of doing what a lot of people do, will say, would you give this huge number and then come with a backup plan? Okay, you didn't want that. Okay, how about this one, right? And it never feels good, because even if that second gift is a very respectful, a beautiful $100,000 gift, if you asked him for the 200 and he gave 100, it just feels kind of yucky now. It's he gave a substantial gift, but it was he didn't. It was I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'll do the lower level gift. But if you do the opposite, if you say, I was thinking 100, but if you want to be the hero of the story, if you would consider stretching to the 250 to do the basketball courts and the outdoor gym area, that would be something that I think would be really magnificent. So this solicitation happened at the school outside during a school program, and the wives were there as well. So he said, let me go talk to my wife. He disappeared for about 10 minutes, came back and told the executive vice president and said, we'll do the 250, right? Which is wonderful, right? So he felt like, I am being the hero. I'm able to rise to the occasion. I can do that. And I think especially with capital projects, you want to, and I know one of the keynotes earlier was saying give multiple options. I do like that. I'm not sure the 3 versus 2, but the idea of saying, we were thinking of this, but we have this stretch opportunity. This is the conservative number and this is the aggressive number. And it will allow that person to rise to the occasion. And if they don't feel bad. It's okay, I'm still doing something that's bakavadik, it's nice, and it was what you were thinking of doing anyway. Okay, so now once you've gotten, everything should go well, you raise 75% of the way to the campaign goal, and you're feeling really good. And we're doing that right now with a synagogue in Young Israel, Scarsdale. We're doing a capital campaign. We're moving now into the public phase of the campaign, and they're feeling really good. Now comes the part where you're trying to get larger community support. Now we're not at mezuzah level giving yet. Right? These are not $1,800 checks, but we are doing things like classrooms, the ones that are the $10,000 plus to $100,000, in that range where people are giving sizable gifts. But now you're leveraging more of the congregants, the community, you're getting them more involved. And the most valuable exercise during this phase is doing these smaller parlor meetings, where if you look at your audience and say, who are my concentric circle of friends, like who know each other. One of my friends who lives in Baltimore, their shul did these miniature parlor meetings with 6 couples, 8 couples, 10 couples, where they would hear about the project, and they would have like the renderings and all that, and the Rav or the Rosh Yeshiva will speak and talk about the project, and then the pitch is like a soft pitch in the room. Like you're not asking them to like, in the old days it was called caucusing, like the old school days, it'd be like, the Halper family pledges. No one does that anymore. At least not many organizations. It's not really culturally appropriate anymore. But the idea of doing like a soft ask and say, we are going to be reaching out to you in the coming days. We're going to be scheduling meetings with you in the coming days to talk about what you can do. Sometimes the host will say, I'm doing $50,000. I would love if my friends around the table could do another $50,000 so we as a group can raise $100,000. Wonderful. Sometimes the host can lead by example in such a way, and that will be very helpful in securing those other gifts in those other meetings. Sometimes the host might even go on the meetings, on the follow-up meetings with those other people, with the Rosh Yeshiva or the rabbi of the shul, to be part of that process. But those parlor meetings are really important. And they might be 6 parlor meetings, 8 parlor meetings, whatever it takes to get as many of those kind of mid-level donors to come together and to give. Also a wonderful opportunity, usually in a good setting, where they're talking, they're asking questions, and these questions are not usually, gotcha, trying to, catch you on something. It's usually very positive and like, oh, and when is this going to be, and what are we going to do with our kids in the meantime? Do we have to move our kids? And all that is very, very helpful and makes them feel like they're being heard. You're answering their questions, and you're able to move forward. So that is the majority of the public phase of the campaign, to get like the $10,000 plus donors, and then the Hamonam. Everybody else, the mezuzahs, are going to be the people who give what a lot of people nowadays would use crowdfunding for, is to button up the campaign, to kind of get across the finish line. And those are the things that if you look at your list of dedication opportunities, you're going to look for the things that have lots of volume. So whether it's mezuzahs, whether it's windows or desks, things that you can kind of commoditize and sell. And okay, these are the things, like I have 20 of these, I have 30 of these, I have 5 of these. And then you can start saying, okay, well, we're going to do like, let's say, a matching campaign at the end, whether it's formally crowdfunding or just you're doing like the good old days before crowdfunding existed, where you would just do matching for the sake of matching. Then you would say, okay, we've got a handful of donors who are going to be giving X amount of money to spur the rest of the community to step up and to give theirs. And this is the attitude at this level is, we want 100% participation, right? That's the key, right? When you get to the lower level donors, the idea is like you should have a stake in this. And sometimes they'll do something like, especially if it's a school or if it's a shul, they might do something for kids. You might have something where it's like, buying a brick and they have the kids' names on it, and it could be, forever in the paved, whatever it is. But this is the opportunity to make it the feel good, the energy, the rah-rah. All the lawn signs are out at this point, but ultimately you're doing all the public phase to cross the finish line. Don't make the mistake of doing the public phase of the campaign early. This is a common pitfall to say, well, let's do a crowdfunding to do the launch of a campaign. You can publicize the success, the progress that you're making on a capital campaign on a project level. You could say, we poured the cement and we've done this. You should do that. That's very good. Your donors are going to see, and your community is going to see that you're doing work. You have to give them updates. But ultimately, when it comes to actual campaign participation, do not involve the general community until you are ready to cross the finish line. Because if you do it too early and you don't cross the finish line, and everyone's exhausted, everyone's stretched, and the lower level donors are stretching to capacity, then they're going to be like, where's my building? And then you end up, driving down Muncie and you're seeing all these like half shell buildings and all these donors who are, really upset, saying like, I paid for this. Where's my beautiful building? Because they did too much of the community stuff up front, and they did not manage expectations, and now it's not a finished product. Do the private phase of the campaign, move into the public phase, and then cross the finish line. Okay, the last point I want to make today, because I know we're out of time, is there often is a feeling or an incentive to say, all right, I don't know if my community can support it. I think my donors will be happier if I choose the more modest goal, right? Instead of going to my donor for $5 million, because it's a $25 million campaign, maybe if the campaign is a $15 million campaign, I can do better with my donors. That's not necessarily true. And we've seen that when you ask a donor for the more ambitious, exciting project, they're willing to give a multiple larger because of the nature of that project, as opposed to something that might be smaller. It's not a foolproof, approach, but for very often, the size of the campaign is correlated to the impact it's going to have, and a donor might be way more interested in that bigger vision than the more subdued version. At the same time, you can absolutely build out a kind of a step down. If we can't achieve this goal, then what is our next dream? So it's kind of saying this is our full dream and this is like our other full dream, right? Like this is like, okay, we can't have this because we're not going to raise 25 or 30 million dollars, but this is what our 15 million looks like, and this is it's not a plan B. This is like the best we're going to do with that 15 million dollars, and we should be excited about it. So that can also be baked in, even though you might be concerned about hitting a goal. It doesn't have to be, go for broke, and if my donors are either going to go for 25 or nothing, to figure out what might be the step down version, which might be more modest, but will still address everything that you need. Any questions? I know we're out of time. Yes.
So we did that. We went bold. We went very, very high. Well, some worked out, except the one advice. That's what we did. A lot of that stuff that, like you mentioned. But the one thing we didn't do was everybody said as soon as you move in, it's very hard to raise money. So we had to do the crowdfunding, like you said, right before we moved in. But there was still another, we raised 8 or 9 million, which was insane for where we were.
Yeah.
Because we did go big. We used J Furniture. But then I owed another $1 million, and
there's
a
a grind.
10,000 out of that million in a year and a half, where we raised 8 million in 2 years.
It's of course going to be
So now I'm dead, and more. I'm next time maybe we're not going to go so big. Right. So because the first time they didn't know how much it was going to cost, they didn't know how much it was going to cost them.
Right.
So they got inspired and they gave huge.
Right.
And Baruch Hashem, and guys even told me they even made more money because they gave more stuff up.
Right.
But now they're like, maybe we should be more judicious next time.
Right. Well, that's why.
I didn't involve them in this because I knew how to sell it high.
Right.
Now they're gonna be like, give me a buck.
Right, which is why going to have those, when you do the interviews early on and you get the test to see how much money is at stake, and how much is in the community, it does give you a sense like, okay, maybe we're biting off more than we can chew, because maybe from these interviews.
Anyway, because we had no choice. So the question was how much more. That was the key there. Right. And also once we moved in, I didn't realize that it dried up.
Yeah. The reason why there's no part of this presentation that says, okay, so when your building's done and you do it, it is much harder to do after finish. We've done some creative things where we've recommended, look, when you walk into IKEA, everything's got price tags on it. Yeah. So there's a kind of approach to say, everything's here for sale. It's done. So there you go. That might be something you could do. All right. Thank you very much for coming today, guys. Thank you.